Hello, and welcome to episode 17 of the Slouching towards Thatcham podcast, which brings you the real-life voices of the UK's best parent bloggers. We're doing something a little bit different this week. Normally I have a guest on the show and we each talk about and read one of our own posts. But this week, my guest and I are going to have a chat about Mumsnet's annual conference Blogfest, which took place over the weekend. So let me start by introducing my guest today. You may have heard him on the podcast before, or even had the pleasure, or at least I think it's a pleasure, of meeting him at a blogging event previously. It's Dave, aka the DADventurer. Hi there, Dave.
Hi Tim, thanks for having me back. I'd like to say that I'm back by popular demand, but I think I was probably the only one available tonight.
Oh, that was supposed to be a secret just between the two of us. But, I suppose we should start with an admission that the original plan had been to record this podcast live in the evening after Blogfest, but it came down in the end to a choice between doing the podcast and drinking pink cocktails in jam jars, and to be honest, neither of us were anywhere near professional enough to resist the lure of the opportunity to drink pink. But here we are anyway. 2 days after the event, a bit calmer, a lot more sober, and with the benefit of having both written blog posts about our reflection on the event, which we might reference every now and then as we waffle on. So, I guess before we launch in, Dave, why don't you tell me a little bit about your reasons for attending Blogfest? I mean, after all, there were, I think, just the four of us dads in amongst 300 to 400 women, with the risk of us feeling as at home as Nigel Farage in a Calais refugee camp.
Well, yes, that's summed it up pretty well there. I think there's a few things really. Having seen the agenda, there was a few different interesting speakers that was going, the likes of David Baddiel. So I thought it'd be good to go along and, actually hear from some people that know what they're talking about, rather than, speaking to people like you. That sounded a bit too much of a dig. You can take that out.
No, I'm storing that one away for future reference.
I think there's also something about going to different conferences and learning from experts and learning from people on stage to sort of kickstart your own thought process and help with sort of building the blogging mojo and things like that. There's also the big thing, which is the social aspect. I knew there's a few people who were going who I wanted to speak to and hang out with, and who I consider blogging friends. So it was good to go along to that. And I guess most importantly, the missus was away for the weekend, so, may as well cause some trouble somewhere else.
Yeah, and admit it, you also came specifically for the mother T-shirt that you didn't end up getting in your goodie bag, didn't you?
I know, I was gutted about that. So Emma from Me, the Man and the Kids had said that they was going to do the mother T-shirt, so I was all ready to sort of rock that and, represent the dads in the women clothes. But then it wasn't in my goodie bag, so I might have to complain about that. So
if anyone from the Mumsnet team is listening into this, do get in touch with Dave and please get him a T-shirt. But anyway, I think for me, very similar to you, I always go to these events looking to pick up one or two nuggets that I can take away with me to do something new or differently with. That's how this podcast was born, and to meet up with other bloggers, catch up and trade stories much as yourself. Oh, and to drink pink cocktails, obviously.
You didn't know the pink cocktails were there at the start, though, did you?
No, I know. That was just a bonus. So let's kick off our discussion of Blogfest by addressing the elephant in the room up front. Your post Blogfest talks specifically about the opening panel session, which was called A Room of One's Own, Motherhood and Creativity. So why don't you start by telling us what this session was supposed to be about?
I think from reading the description of what it was about, it was supposed to be, and I'm not saying it wasn't about that before anybody jumps in on me at the start. It was to be talked about how a mum can change you as a person. So particularly focusing on things like whether it stifles your creativity, whether it means that you lose your identity, because are you a mum? Are you still the woman who was, say, working before you became a mother, for instance? So I think for me, it sounded interesting. It sounded valid. A lot of people go through it, and they had a few different people on stages with different experiences. So people who divorced from their husbands, and I think there was one who hadn't got kids and two who did have kids. So from that perspective, everything was geared up to be a good chat.
Yeah, and I think it was an interesting topic to kick off. I mean, particularly given that we had an audience there that was basically 99% female. And yeah, I think it did cover some very relevant and important topics and points. But your post is more about your reaction to the tone and some of the specific things that were said, particularly about the role of men during this discussion. Now, I was sat 3 rows in front of you at the time, and I could hear you sighing and tutting for a lot of it. So tell us a little bit more about why that was.
The first thing to say really is that there was nothing big or specific that offended me. It was more sort of the cumulative effect of little snidey remark after little snidey remark surrounding dads as a whole. So they were probably made as jokes. You know, I like to think I can take a joke. I'm not overly sensitive about these type of things. But for me, it reinforces a stereotype that's unfair. And when you're going along to an event like this, like we did as a couple of blokes, and you know you're only going to be a couple of blokes there, it alienates you straight away if you've got people sort of slapping down the role that a dad does. So I guess in terms of the specifics, it was the stereotyping really, as I've mentioned. So there was a couple of little things said like men don't change nappies or useless at doing stuff around the house or prefer to be in the pub. So me and you, we're blokes, Tim, as last time I checked, and I wouldn't say that me or you fit into this stereotypical view of what a bloke is. So we're dad bloggers. We obviously care and love our family. We talk about it to the world. So to attend something like that and then be put into this pigeonhole, it just sort of pissed me off, like as you could probably tell by the tutting and sighing. And I think the thing that got me more is I'm a stay-at-home dad. I've been a stay-at-home dad since May, and since my daughter was born 15 months ago, I've basically been at home with her every single day because I was freelancing before that, so I worked from home. I can totally empathise with everything that was said on stage about things like losing your identity. Do you worry that you are let down to people? All of this stuff is things that I obviously think about, because I'm in that same situation. So to say that I view myself very much in the role that a stay-at-home mum views herself in the role, just because like I've got a penis, it doesn't mean that I'm doing anything differently to what a mum would do. So to hear things like, oh, you know, dads are useless or they're not interested or whatever, that to me just sort of goes against every single thing that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. You know, we're not in the 1960s, are we?
No, and I think that's right. And it's not just necessarily about the labels. You don't need to name check dads or use the generic parents term necessarily in all of it, but it's possible to have the discussion about the role of mums and also stay-at-home dads without being negative about it. And I think that was what caused the issue, certainly with ourselves, and not just with the dads in the room, but also with a number of the mums as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I think we both had people saying that they felt, you know, sorry for us or whatever, and the response I've had to the post has been like overwhelmingly positive from, you know, mainly mums who were reading it.
Yeah, I had similar comments, both face to face and subsequently on the blog. Quite a few of the mums I spoke to were quite annoyed as well. You know, they recognised the contribution that their husbands and partners make, and they felt that the negativity of some of those comments detracted from a lot of the valid points that were made. So, yeah, I mean that was a real shame, wasn't it? And I wrote the following in my post about it, which I think echoes what you've said. So I said, I don't think it helps when the opening panel session takes a distinctly negative male-bashing tone. Yes, I appreciate that 99% of the audience were mums, and there was a lot of laughter in the room. Yes, I know it's possible that maybe we're taking things too seriously, but there's not much point complaining about the unfairness of female stereotypes on the one hand, while applying the most antiquated of male ones on the other. And, contrary to the caricatures, we're not all beer-swilling misogynistic monsters. Some of us rather like our cocktails.
Exactly. I think that's spot on. How can you aim for equality if all you're going to do is look at different groups and sort of knock them down? And I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to get out in this post, and just sort of create a bit of debate and conversation. For me, mums and dads are equal, and they should be viewed as such. I know that the full-time working dad and the housewife are still, I guess, the majority, but what about single parents? What about working mums? What about gay couples? To go to an event and it just be focused on a particular group and not give reference, as you say, you don't need to name check, but it just would be nice to feel like there was that little bit more openness and ability to bring in different groups. So to read one of the extracts from my post around this, I say, as a stay-at-home dad, what I'm starting to realise is that this mum versus dad divide is bloody ridiculous, let alone then breaking down these groups into subgroups like stay-at-home mum versus working mum or breastfeeding mum versus bottle-feeding mum. Seriously, who gives a shit? We're all fucking parents. We're all doing what we can to raise our little ones in the best way we can, in the best way we can manage. It's a joint effort, not a matter of one group versus another.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I was struggling with was that the way that the mum-dad relationship was portrayed in some of these comments was almost like it was being put across as some kind of tug-of-war competition. And I think the reality is that for the majority of us, parenting isn't a competition at all. It's an equal partnership, and between us we do whatever we can to find a balance that works. I guess from your perspective as a stay-at-home dad, that must be doubly true for you.
Yeah, totally. For me, a relationship should be 50-50. The decisions that you make should be sort of talked about and agreed as a couple. I'm not a stay-at-home dad because I was forced into it, or because the missus is stronger than me or whatever. Which, to be fair, she probably is. But it was the best thing for our family at the time. Hayley was earning more money than me because I'd just gone freelance. So what would be the point of her not working for us to be worse off financially when we don't believe in gender stereotypes, and it's all about doing the best for your family. I think that certain people's experiences on stage, they probably didn't view men particularly well because of things that had happened in their past. And I think, sorry to say it, but if you've got mums out there who are staying at home when they don't want to, or they can't go back to work or whatever because their husband says they can't, then maybe you've got to look at your own relationship, because that's not right.
Yeah, it can be difficult, can't it? You're talking about a personal situation, but then the danger is that you make sweeping generalisations about it, which I think is, I guess, the issue that we've had with that session. So, yeah, before we move on, is there anything else you want to say about that opening session?
Yes, I guess the last thing to sort of mention is maybe going forward, if it's another session for Mumsnet or Brit Mums or whatever, it's just about getting that representation. So I guess I summed this best up in my last quote on the post, which says, as such, I'd have loved to have seen a dad on the panel during this session and have seen the topic change from motherhood to parenthood. Why not be inclusive of all parents rather than create the mum versus dad divide? I realise that you've got to play to the majority of the audience, and the handful of men probably make up 1% of the attendees at Blogfest, but other sessions during the day had male speakers, so why didn't this one?
Well, that sounds like you're volunteering for next year, so Justine, Kieran, if you're listening to this, I think you've got your first panellist for next year.
They might not like me having read that post, so I might be barred.
So I guess moving on, I don't know about you, but I think the deficiencies of that opening session that we've just been talking about were, for me, they were magnified by how well some of the subsequent sessions pitched an agenda that was very strongly pro-mum, but without being anti-dad. So from the conversations that I think both of us have had and comments that we've read, it seems that the pre-lunch Thinkbombs session was probably the highlight of most people's days. Now, for people who weren't there, these were short 10-minute talks covering women's equality, writing and social media, delivered by writer and broadcaster Sandy Toskvig, crime author Val McDermid, and comedian, author and all-round Twitter legend David Baddiel, or David Baddle, as a certain friend of ours called him. Yes, you, Emma. Now, what did you think of that session, Dave? Any particular favourite from those three?
Yeah, I enjoyed all of them. I think my favourite was probably David Baddiel. just because he brought the sort of stand-up element to it. You know, he used PowerPoint to show some of his tweets in almost like a Dave Gorman-esque way. He basically brought a lot of laughs to the day, and did it in a way that I don't think anyone else did.
Yeah, I thought he was terrific. I mean, I thought they all were, and the two big things for me were, firstly, how inspiring and engaging all three of them were. I mean, they were all from very different backgrounds, but what they all had in common was the fact that they were exceptional communicators who can take a message and really make it resonate with people. And as bloggers, that's what all of us are trying to do, and that's really something for us to aspire to. And then, yeah, the second thing, I did particularly love the way that Sandy Tosvig delivered some very strong messages about promoting women's equality without ever at any stage turning it into an anti-male agenda. It was for me a fantastic example of having a really clear focus on your key messages and not allowing anything, even the desire to get a cheap laugh, to dilute it. And that's a big reminder for me as a writer, because I know that's something I'm prone to doing, to wandering off on random tangents in my own writing, and it's something that I'm constantly battling. And when it's done really well like that, it's just so effective.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you struggle with that, imagine how I feel.
The other guest who really seemed to capture people's imaginations was stand-up comedian Shappy Khorsandi, who was part of the panel in the closing session about giving away public stories of our private lives. And I thought she was great. She was funny and quick-witted and vulnerable and honest about the ups and downs of having two kids by two different fathers. But at no point did she blame anyone, and I just loved the way she told it as it is, about how tough it can be to be a working, divorced, single mum. And some of the experiences she shared, some of them were quite close to the knuckle, but I found what she said really thought-provoking and challenging, and that's really what these things are supposed to be about, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think when you can see that honesty in what someone's talking about, and the fact that she's willing to talk about it and share, it helps. And ultimately, as bloggers, that's what we're looking to do, aren't we? We're looking to gain that rapport with our readers, and we often do that by sort of sharing our own personal experience. Obviously she was really funny as well and stuff, which massively helped. But I really enjoyed all of that last session. I think there was some good people on the panel, and it was just interesting to hear how people who write for a living or are comedians for a living deal with the whole private versus public life, because like us, all of their material comes from things that they do mainly with the family.
Yeah, one of the things that I noted was, I now think that I have established the template for getting good external speakers. So something I noted in my post was that it's entirely possible to promote a woman's agenda with intelligence and wit and without mudslinging. So Exhibit A, Sandy Tosvig. Exhibit B, Shappy Khorsandi. So maybe all you need to do is to just have Sandy in your name somewhere. So in fact, now I think about it, I might just have to change my name. Maybe they'll make me funnier. Well, less unfunny anyway.
Or you could dress up as Sandy from Greece. I could just picture you in that black number at the end, the black leather.
For anyone with a mental picture in your head, I'm really, really sorry.
I'm not.
But what about you, Dave? What were your other highlights from the day?
I think for me mainly it was the social aspect, being able to not just because you've invited me on here, so I'm not brown nosing, but to hang out with you and to hang out with other bloggers who I speak to online. It's really nice just having that social aspect. If you get on well with someone online and you enjoy what they write and things, then you're going to do that. You can do that in everyday life. So I think that's a massive thing, just meeting people and speaking to people and just sort of turning that online life into real life, so to speak. Obviously there were the cocktails as well, they went down quite nicely. I guess from my perspective, I didn't really learn much, not meaning to sound big-headed or anything like that, but I think I'm probably at a point blogging wise where I've learnt what I can from other people when you go to somewhere like that and it's like an expert speaking about the basics. So for instance, I went to a BuzzFeed session which was interesting, but I didn't really get anything from it. Am I going to start putting cats into my posts or talking about random things just to get people clicking onto my blog through the likes of bait-click titles? I'm not going to do that. So I'm very much of the opinion of if I'm going to do something, I'll learn it and figure it out for myself and do it in that way. I know there was a few people I spoke to who were, say, newer bloggers or sort of get their mojo back by listening to people like this, and that's absolutely fine. And you get different things from different sessions. But like I say, for me, it was the social aspect mainly, listening to some good speakers, but I didn't really take anything away from it blogging wise.
Yeah, and I think I'm quite similar. I think you have to set your expectations accordingly, depending on how experienced you are or whether you have any specific needs. And I always think that if I come out with just a couple of little nuggets, that's actually more than enough for me. And for me, as someone who's currently 5 months into writing his first book and is already 4.5 months behind, possibly more, I really enjoyed the breakout session about 25 ways to get published, which had a lot of useful practical advice. And actually, that was the one session I really sat down in and took notes in. I did also enjoy the session about brevity is the soul of wit, which was partly a group of professional writers chatting about their own family anecdotes, but also had some useful pointers about the value of enforcing your own word counts on yourself and being absolutely ruthless about cutting back on unnecessary narrative tangents and verbiage. Again, something that I've often been guilty of in the past. And those of us who've ever had the experience of having beautiful flowing prose hacked to pieces by a sub-editor who's up against the deadline will understand the benefits of doing it yourself.
Well, that's maybe my issue, then I went to the wrong sessions.
But I guess, we probably ought to wrap up this little chat soon before everyone falls asleep, assuming anyone is actually still awake. So let's quickly deal with 2 final questions. So firstly, how would you sum up Blogfest, and how is it different from BritMums Live?
Well, I'd sum it up sort of quite short and sweet. It's well worth it. I had a good time, but didn't really take anything away from it from a blogging perspective. In terms of the difference between BritMums and Blogfest, I felt they were quite similar, if I'm honest. Group of bloggers all together learning about different things. I would say that though probably the main difference is one of them. So BritMums focuses more on how you blog to an extent, like the techniques and things along those lines, whereas Blogfest is more from a writing perspective. So you've got writers who are doing the talks, and it's people who are professionally published authors and things like that. It felt like there was a little bit of a difference there where it wasn't, whereas BritMums was a bit more bloggers doing the presenting and things from recollection.
I think I completely agree with what you say, even though it's actually a very similar crowd, a very similar audience at the 2 events, but quite a different vibe. One a little bit more kind of about the techniques of blogging and much more about the craft of writing. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, given that no 2 bloggers' needs are alike, and I don't think anyone would really want to turn up to 2 events that were basically exactly the same. So
yeah, exactly.
So finally, what would you say to anyone, whether it's dads or mums or any other species in between, if they haven't been to Blogfest or BritMums or any other blogging event before, would you recommend?
Yes, it's stealing a famous line from a certain sports clothes manufacturer. I'd just say do it. Like I know that I know the post I wrote about this and about BritMums were both probably a little bit negative from a dad's perspective, but how are we supposed to change things if dads don't go? We need to be represented. So I'd be actually looking at what I'm trying to say in a different way in my post, and instead of putting dads off, I'd be saying come along, change the status quo. The only way you're going to do that is by joining the likes of me and Tim at these type of events.
Yeah, and I think we've both said in the past that we're more than happy to provide constructive feedback, to get involved. Both of us are now involved with the BritMums editorial team, for instance, and will no doubt be involved at the very least as a participant in some capacity at BritMums Live. So I would absolutely agree with what you say. I mean, it's very easy to focus on the negative of an event like this, but events like this are never perfect, and different things will take different people out of them. And even if it's only coming down for the social aspect of meeting up with people who you've conversed with only online before, that it's worth it for that alone. Just in case anyone from Nike is available, we are available for sponsorship, and if not, other sporting goods brands are available.
as long as I get a cut.
So Dave, thank you very much for joining me to record this Blogfest review podcast. It's been a pleasure to chew the fat, as always.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that's it for this episode of the Slouching Towards Thatcham podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different format this week. And if you have enjoyed it and would like to hear more like this, then do please drop me a line. If you'd like to listen to either future or previous episodes, you'll find them published on the blog and also on iTunes and various other podcasting sites. You can follow me on the blog at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com, on Twitter at ThatchamDad, and on various other social media channels. You'll find links to all of the above, plus Dave's links, in the show notes on the blog, and I will also include links to both Dave's and my Blogfest posts. So all that remains for me is to say thank you all for listening to this podcast, and hopefully you'll join me again next week. Until then, goodbye.